Welcome her with the warm Southern California. Welcome to Sid Advarado.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Nellie and her team for inviting me out. As stated, I'm coming all the way from the East Coast, came from Virginia, born and raised in Jersey, but live in Virginia right now. I'm not getting bored for the person that has traveled far this time from London, but I'm happy to be here. This is my first time actually in California. I've been in California for years, and I must divulge a little secret. I felt like I was East Coast through and through. I've heard people say, I want to live in California. I'm like, no, that's not for me. Love Four Seasons, but as I was driving in today, I'm like, there's something to this California thing. I think I might look a little closer to, maybe coming over to the West Coast, because it is beautiful here. I can see why people decide to relocate. Yes. Well, first of all, what I'm going to talk about is very specific. I met Nellie a few months ago now. She was taking a course, actually a 2-day course that I do to help nonprofits become a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. And so that word HUD, with HUD, it can be a beast. There's a lot of attachment there. And so organizations really need some hand-holding on how to navigate that. So Nellie being herself in the middle of the class as I was teaching, she's like, oh my God, do you come and speak? Do you come and speak? And so I'm like, yes, I had no idea we'd turn into this. But I'm going to talk about how to become a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. So taking the first steps. I'm really not going to get really deep into it because to be quite honest, every time you're talking about anything that has to do with HUD, there's a lot more time that goes into it. So I'm going to give you the quick and the dirty. And we're going to talk about taking the first steps. So first of all, as I said, my name is Sid. They already gave all that information. But one of the things that I want to talk about here is that I've engaged with HUD for a long time now, pretty much almost my entire career. And so in addition to the Office of Housing Counseling, some of the funds that you talked about today, like for down payment and closing cost assistance, they do come from federal funding. And so they come from funds called such things as HOME or CBG. In HUD, we like to have a lot of acronyms there. So HOME, CBG funds, so a lot of your local, your state, and your federal funding actually come down the pipeline from those particular sources. I've also overseen programs with HUD, another program called HOPWA. Basically, HOPWA stands for Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS or HIV. And so there is particular funding that HUD provides for people who, someone in their household has either been diagnosed with AIDS or HIV. And so it kind of works like Section 8 specifically for those that pretty much have that. And so there's some kind of funding for that as well. There's a lot of other HUD programs that are out there, but there's just a few in which I've had the opportunity of overseeing at some particular point in my career. And so I speak a lot of what's like, some people fall HUD-ese because of the policy. And the thing is that even though they all fall under that HUD umbrella, they all have very different policies and guidelines. So anytime you're going to be successful in overseeing a program, you first of all have to read those policies and those guidelines that HUD has put out in order to make sure that you are consistently in compliance with that particular types of funding. And so what we do at AFC Consulting Group, we work with organizations, a lot of times nonprofit, public entities, and we provide that technical assistance. We kind of come in a little overall, see what they want to accomplish, and we provide technical support to housing, specifically housing agencies, other nonprofits, and other public serving organizations. We do things like developing targeted training as courses, kind of similar to the one that Nellie herself and her team has attended. We create a strategic onboarding plan for staff because a lot of times when you are, especially smaller organizations, when you are onboarding staff, they don't really have the staff that really has the time to dedicate to teaching what all that policy and things like that require. So we kind of come in, we provide a plan to educate the staff members on basically how to make them fun, because there's, when it comes to HUD programs, the big thing is making sure that you are constantly compliant. And so we help to increase organizational capacity, crafting procedures for program compliance and implementing, when programs need to implement new programs, kind of like how when COVID hit us, a lot of these housing agencies were given funds, but when they were given funds, they're kind of building the ship while trying to sell it at the same time. And so when you have a lot of times we give funds as organizations, it's like, okay, kind of like how Christina just mentioned, is that when you are given these funds, you have to spend them down, and you have a certain amount of time in which you have to spend them down. And so a lot of times organizations spend a lot of time when, first of all, we have to hire, we have to do all this. And so if you had 9 months to spend those funds, the six months of that time was, first of all, trying to find staff. Then after staff, on board, and we only have 3 months to spend those funds down. And that's not a good thing, especially when it's, organizations can find themselves in a situation where now the time is up, we haven't spent those funds, and we have to give back funds. And the thing about giving back funds back to the government, that's not a good thing, because that means that if we have to give back funds, then you didn't need those funds. And that means that next time, your community is not going to get those funds because you showed that you had to give back funds, which meant that your community didn't need those funds. And so those are the things that we kind of concentrate on and talk about. And so, raise your hand. If you've never heard of a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, raise your hand. If you've never heard of a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, raise your hand. Okay, so that means everybody else in here has heard of a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, and you can tell me what a HUD-approved housing counseling agency is. Is that the case? All right. Well, for those of you who have not heard of a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, they're amazing organizations. And so here at AssistNa, that's what we are embarking upon. We are embarking upon the journey of becoming a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. And so once we are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, these are all the amazing things that we can do. And so a HUD-approved housing counseling agency is an organization that is supported or sponsored by HUD, and it administers housing counseling services across the country. Usually, when you have what's called a local housing counseling agency, you are focusing on the population within that county. Right? And so a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, once you get that designation, you are able to apply for HUD grant funding. And so we just heard a little bit about what grant funding is from that NOFO. It says NOFO here, but they kind of call it a NOFO right now. And so basically HUD puts out a NOFO every year. And that NOFO is multiple millions of dollars. And what happens is HUD housing counseling agencies then have to apply and say, hey, we provide these services and we want to apply for this particular grant because these are the services in which we offer in our community. And so once you apply for that grant, there's a certain amount of money that we give to organizations to basically provide those services. And so the oversight of housing counseling falls under what's called HUD's Office of Housing Counseling. We call it OHC for short. Okay, so OHC decides which organizations are going to get that funding. And so at HUD or housing counseling agencies, you must employ certified housing counselors. Okay, HUD certified housing counselors. And that's not easy to become a HUD certified housing counselor. I myself am a HUD certified counselor. And what that is a very rigorous exam where we as housing counselors must take. And in that exam, there's a lot of topics that are covered. Those topics include things such as budgeting, credit, savings, foreclosure prevention, consumer rights, fair housing, eviction avoidance, much more. Basically, I always say that we as housing counselors, we have to know what the lender knows, we have to know what the real estate agent knows, we have to know what the financial planner knows, all of that. We have to take that exam and pass that exam in order to work at a HUD housing counseling agency. Because when clients are coming in, they're coming in for some very serious situations. They're coming in to see a housing counselor because they're behind in their mortgage, and so they need somebody to help talk to them and with them and their servicer to basically save their home. They're coming in because they want to purchase a home, and so they need hand-holding on what that home purchase process is and what it looks like. They're coming in because they are a renter, and they're having issues with their landlord. So we need to be able to talk to them about landlord-tenant issues. Let them know their rights, their consumer rights. Maybe they're coming in because they've been discriminated against as they're trying to rent or they're trying to buy. And so there's 7 protected federal classes. And so we're helping them to file a complaint to say, hey, I've been discriminated against based on these 7 protected classes. And localities have above that 7. So you have to have a minimum that 7, but then there's, you can go above that 7 as well. So there's a lot that we basically, like anything that has to do with a housing goal, they're coming to a housing counseling agency because they have a housing goal, they have a housing issue, and they need a housing counselor. So that's why we have to take that rigorous exam, because we need to know what we're talking about. If they're about to be evicted, we need to know exactly what the laws are. We need to know what it is that they're talking about. So if you are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, that means that you are employing housing counselors who have taken and passed that exam. And when clients are coming to you for real life issues like that, you know what you're talking about. All right. And so some of the things that we do is we assist individuals and families with their housing and financial goals. We provide, and those services can be provided in a one-on-one setting, or the services can be provided in a group setting. And so that one-on-one setting, we're going to talk about what those services are, but we're also providing group education. We're providing education in that group environment as well. So once again, we as housing counselors, we are looked at as the experts, housing experts, okay? So you might ask, well, what specific services do housing counseling agencies offer? And this is something that, as HCN is, becoming a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, you decide what services you're going to provide to that community. But it's just not the organization itself determining what you're going to provide. We first of all have to convince HUD that there's a need of this in this particular community. And then secondly, you have to have the staff that has this expertise. Okay, and so these are basically, there's 9 services that are covered under housing counseling. Those 9 services include pre-purchase. This means that this is someone who is looking to purchase a home, who need to go through that process, and so you are helping them to gain access to a home. They're coming in to get pre-purchase counseling. They can come to you to get what's called non-delinquency post-purchase. So this is somebody who already owns a home. They're not in trouble with their mortgage, but they're coming to you for some other financial issue, okay? The agency can cover rentals. So this is anybody that rents, they're coming to you with rental issues. Maybe they want to rent, they want to know what their affordability looks like. So they're coming to talk to you about rental. An agency can provide homeless services, that's another thing. And so this is someone who is currently not housed that meet that definition of homeless, and so they're coming in for that. Disaster is a new one that HUD actually included July of last year. And so we know that disasters are no longer isolated to certain regions of the country. So now housing counseling agencies are expected to cover disaster. And so disaster is before disaster happens. That means that you are helping families, you are helping communities to prepare for a disaster, or they can come to you for disaster recovery, which means the disaster has already happened, and you as the housing counseling agency are now connecting them to resources involving disaster. They can come to you for foreclosure prevention. Okay, this is someone who is in the midst of about to lose their house. They've not been able to pay for some reason or another. And so the agency or the counselor is expected to help them. And so foreclosure prevention is split up into 2 different areas. This is somebody who is coming in who has a forward mortgage, that's a regular mortgage. Or this is someone who is coming in because they have a reverse mortgage. That's our seniors, okay? Reverse mortgage is someone, you have to be 62 or older to get a reverse mortgage. So if someone has a reverse mortgage, they can go to a housing counseling agency and get foreclosure prevention and try to keep their home. And then for reverse mortgage in itself, which is origination, which means that they're trying to get. So these are the areas that a housing counselor will offer counseling. Not all housing counseling agencies offer all of these services. If you actually go to HUD's website, hud.gov, and you push in the search bar, housing counseling, they'll show you what housing counseling agencies all across the country. And you will see that not all housing counseling agencies offer all services. The agency decides what services that you're going to offer, but that also depends on if the agency has the expertise, has the counselors to do that. All right, so as I said, housing counseling agencies, they assist with things like saving goals, building credit, debt reduction, mortgage options, landlord tenant issues, fair housing, and loss mitigation, which is foreclosure as well, foreclosure prevention. So, becoming a housing counseling agency, as I said, speaking with Nellie, she kind of contacted me because, hey, this is the process that we as an organization, we want to go through. We want to become a HUD housing counseling agency. There's a lot that goes into it. And so basically how an organization would actually get started is that they would go and they would take that eligibility tool. One of the biggest things is that in order to be a HUD housing counseling agency, you must be a nonprofit. For-profit entities are not eligible to be housing counseling agencies. You must be a nonprofit. And then there are several other questions. There's about 50 other questions that are asked. Depending on how an organization answers those questions will depend if they can move forward in becoming a HUD housing counseling agency. Accessing services. Michelle spoke on this earlier, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but one of the services that many people actually engage housing counseling agencies for is because they want to buy a house. Pre-purchase counseling is the biggest or the most used type of counseling that people kind of go to housing counseling agencies for. They want to buy a house. And so when they buy a house, in order to make that affordable, for some people, they have to get down payment and closing cost assistance. And so Michelle, she mentioned earlier her bank. And so the thing about down payment and closing cost assistance is that it can be very specific, right? So if you were to engage with her companies because you're using her lending. However, that's not always the case. It is possible to get down payment and closing cost assistance without using assistance from a specific bank. Okay, sometimes it's overseen by certain localities. And so when you have a person who's looking to access down payment and closing cost assistance, if they're looking to get that assistance from, as I said here, there's various types. They can do it local funding. So basically she would fall into that level of local funding. She spoke specifically about certain counties. However, there are regional fundings, things like you have resources like the Federal Bank, who would offer grants and down payment and closing cost assistance from a regional standpoint. But then you also have federal funding, or federal down payment and closing cost assistance as well. And so down payment and closing cost assistance is available in different areas. One of the best places to go is to go to the link that I have there, which I can provide to them, that you can disperse to everyone, but it lets you know where you can go and get down payment and closing cost assistance in the area that you live. But I tell people all the time, the people who are going to know where the down payment and closing cost assistance is are your housing counseling agencies, because they're plugged into that particular community and they know where to send people to get to. They're going to first of all work with them to overcome any financial barriers, any credit barriers. Once they get to that place where they're what's called mortgage ready, then they can move forward to getting the down payment and closing cost assistance. And so there's my information there. If you need to reach out, have any questions, you can also go to her team as well. But as I said, this particular topic is very specific for agencies that can go through this very rigorous. We are up for a journey, this very rigorous process in order to become a HUD housing counseling agency. It is not very easy, and so kind of the stages, kind of like where we are now. Basically, you just can't jump in and say, "Hey, I want to be a HUD housing counseling agency." HUD actually requires that you show that you provided this service for at least a year in that community before you can even ask for something. And so for some agencies, that can be very difficult because you have to employ housing counselors. It's like, how do you do all that without funding? But, HUD wants you to show that track record before you can actually become a HUD housing counseling agency. And then after that, there's different layers to it as far as, if you want to be an intermediary, there's a lot more that kind of goes into it. So basically, you're in a journey for at least a year before you can even become a housing counseling agency. But I can just tell by Nellie's spirit and her team that she will face, this challenge and we will move forward. Any questions? Yes. And so when you're a housing agency, you can actually serve anyone. Now, when you're talking about down payment, closing cost assistance, funds like that, funds and things like that, once you get into that area, that is income criteria, but as far as who you're going to serve, I serve people who are low income, but I also have clients that have come in that were making a lot of money and they just didn't really know how to budget, and things like that. And so in that capacity, we can serve, we can provide counseling, education to them. Any other questions? It is not on the website, and so if you want to just say, hey, I think I might want to become a housing counselor, where you can go and get information about the test is HUD Housing Counseling, no, HUDHousingCounselors.com. That tells you basically there are 6 different topics that you have to master in order to pass that exam. And let me just tell you how challenging it can be. HUD actually, they came out with this test in 2016, but you had to be in compliance August 2020, or by August 2020. You have people who were housing counselors for 15, 20 years, took the test and failed 5, 6 times. That's how rigorous the exam is. And so that's another course that I teach where it's like, okay, you want to take the HUD exam, this is what you need to do in order to prepare to be successful. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of housing counselors that had some thoughts about the test, but if you're really going to be, I feel like this, if you're going to be talking to people about the things that we talk to, foreclosure, all that stuff, you need to have a minimum level, of expertise if you're going to be leading people into very serious, issues.
The minimum level, how many years does your nonprofit have
To take, so you have to show that you are providing this service in your community for at least a year before you would be coming in housing counseling. Basically, you have to operate like a housing counseling agency for a year prior to going to them to say, I want to come. Not just, be a nonprofit, you have to show that you provide services. You be a nonprofit for 20 years, but if your agency is not able to show that you've been providing these services for a year in the manner that you have what you do to provide the services, then you will not, your application will not. Yes. So once again, it's not about the years of how your nonprofit is consistent. Going back to this, if you are going to provide pre-purchase counseling, post-purchase counseling, your nonprofit has to show that you've been providing these services. And HUD is very specific on what goes into a session. You just can't be like, oh, I have somebody in my house. I teach another person this, what goes into a housing counseling session. And so there are 8 things that needs to happen in order for that to be a HUD session. And so basically you have to run like you are a HUD housing agency for at least a year. So you first of all decide what services is your agency going to offer. Are you going to offer pre-purchase? Are you going to offer rental? Then you have to sit down and provide one-on-one counseling to people. Make sure that that counseling session is ran in the way that HUD says a housing counseling session should be ran. Documentation, client management system, there's a lot that goes into that. Another question? Yes. So you determine which services you're going to offer. There's a little bit of a caveat to that. Is, okay, for example, I just mentioned that the most popular service that housing agencies offer is pre-purchase. Say you say, well, I just want to do pre-purchase because that's my love, I want to do my house. Are there 5 other housing agencies in the area that provide pre-purchase counseling? But maybe the area you're in, the need is more so rental. So the thing is you really have to do an assessment within your community to see what first of all, see if there's other housing counseling agencies in the area. See really what the need of the community is. Because if you're in an area where within a 5-mile radius, there's 8 other housing counseling agencies that's already purchased, is your agency really needed? You know, but we know that in that particular area, nobody's really doing rental. So you really have to do an assessment in that area to see, first of all, which housing counseling agencies are in the area, what services are they offering, and what is the need that your community has? Because when you're becoming a housing counseling agency, you have to do what's called an agency plan, agency work plan. And in that work plan is like 2 pages minimum. In that work plan, you have to list the demographic you're working in, why there's a need. It's a lot that you have to write to demonstrate that this is needed in the community. And so so my answer is you don't have to offer all those services, but it really needs to make sense to your community. Yes.
Thank you so much. I have a friend who started a nonprofit that there's a market to or foster care system aged out who are in that age group. And I think she said she wants to make her nonprofit like a one-stop shop. And so what I'm hearing is also what's good for, possibly that rental. They're going to need that help with learning how to rent and how to plan, how to finance. And I'm familiar with our areas. I know there's a couple locally, but they more so are for a purchase or credit.org, where they're helping with credit differently. Not quite for this specific population. So I'd like to talk with you more about this and how we can help her position with helping these young adults to learn how to finance as well as how to get into rental property and know about what their options are for home buying.
Yeah, that actually is a great example, and it's a great combination. I myself did that when I was a director at Catholic Charities. Within that organization, we did have foster care, and so it was something that started where we kind of were doing classes for those that were aging out, particularly for that population.
So even if I didn't have an expert, if I could take
Well, when you save money, the thing about most housing counseling agencies is that many housing counseling agencies are not giving money. They're not there for rental assistance. They're there for counseling. And so they are getting grant funding from HUD not to pass those costs on to clients. So clients are still able to go and get CHC, are still able to go and get services, but it's not, this program is not about them getting money. This program is about them getting the counseling. This program is about them getting the guidance. And so I always say there's nothing free. We say that, I tell people that it's just no cost to the client. It's definitely cost to the agency because they have to pay the counselor to sit there. They have to pay for certain things. It's just that the client is able to go in the door and not be charged to get that expert advice and that guidance. Now, you do have some agencies that kind of fall into both, where they are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency and they're receiving funds from other areas to provide financial assistance and rental assistance. But the agency that I saw was the same thing, was that there are certain times of the year where we could couple the grant funding that we got, where we could offer their free expert advice, but we also have financial assistance. But like you said, that financial pot is not limitless. So there were certain parts of the year where you're coming to get the expert advice only, but you're not leaving with that financial assistance. And so that's a great question and example, but I don't, people get that confused often. It's not a situation where you're leaving with financial assistance. Some agencies do get other funding. And so that's where they have to be able to juggle that multiple funding when we're doing housing counseling, but the extra benefit is financial assistance. That's not the situation with all agencies and organizations. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, so great question. And so it sounds like you're asking, do we share this information with HUD? So no, HUD is not really interested in the aspect of we want to see interfacing because HUD doesn't do direct services. Let's just say that. They're not going to be the one that sits down with people. That's why they're giving the money to organizations. So you don't need to interface from that capacity. Now, from a housing counseling standpoint, HUD does require all housing agencies in the country to report to them quarterly how many clients that they've seen. That's important because what's going to happen is at the end of the year, that's what they take to Congress to say, look, there's a huge need in our community. This is why we need multiple billions of dollars. And so every year during the budget, they will set an amount for housing counseling. Now, during the pandemic, a lot of money went to housing counseling agencies because they were the front, they were the people that, hey, you know, we're about to be evicted. We are about to be, you know, our house about to be foreclosed. So there was quite a bit of money that went to housing counseling agencies. There was that case there. But usually what happens is they're going to take the information they get from all housing counseling agencies, how many people we've seen, and that is what we take to Congress to say, this is a needed service, continue to give us funds, that money goes to the organizations. Now, I want to say this too. I talked about the grant funding. I want people to have very realistic expectations. Organizations are not just getting, the housing counseling industry as a whole gets to multiple billions of dollars. Not one or two organizations get to multiple billion dollars. And so sometimes people go to this thinking like, oh, if I become a $100,000 housing agency, our agency is going to get $100,000. No. The amount that organizations differ depends on how many people you're serving, okay? But HUD says this in their handbook. They do not want 100% of your funding coming from them. So the expectation, you're going to get, I can't say a small portion, you're going to get a portion of what that program needs. But the expectation from the organization is that you continue to go out and get other funds and leverage. And they say that 100% of your funds cannot come from them. So it is going to be very expected that you're constantly doing the fundraising, you're constantly speaking. It's because they're expecting for you to have other monies to come in the door to supplement what it is that they give you. And so I like to put that out there because people think like, oh, I'm about to get $150,000 money.
And then if you do get a grant, you break it up by month?
No, that's another thing that kind of gets into another area, but the grant is reimbursable. It's what's called a reimbursable grant. So what that means is that your organization needs to be strong enough to do the work up front and get paid later. And sometimes this can be months or a year later after you see the client. So it is a reimbursable grant. You're doing the work, and then you're saying, hey, this is the work that we've done, and then you're reimbursing the work. So that organization has to be financially strong enough to do the work, carry on the work, and then be reimbursed later.